Wow. The reason I'm doing this is because it's the only way I know how to promote anything, is think like a band. And I just feel like music is such an intensely personal thing, right? When I say the word music, it means something different to each and every one of you. And I feel the only way that you can have an impactful conversation about music is to do it personally with people, right? And because I've spent my entire life working in the music industry, I don't know, I've drunk the Kool-Aid and thought that just being on the road away from your family is the way to make money. So I thought, well, why don't I give this a go? And I've been very lucky in my professional life. I have a company that works all over the world, so I was able to call some friends in places and say, if there's a bookshop that'll have me, I'll come. And this is number 52 of that. But to start with the book, it took me 4 years to write. And just looking at some of the books in here that are twice the size, I'm like, I don't know how people do it. And when I got the book deal, they made me rewrite it. So it wasn't very good, apparently. Thankfully, I had a couple editors who helped me. But the way I want to explain the book first is through an analogy of water. So, oh, it's a parking garage. Oh, of course, yeah. So I'm sure, everyone here has had a glass of water, a bottle of water today, right? If you haven't, you should be drinking more water. And water, I find water incredibly fascinating in so many different ways. Of course, it's our lifeblood. We need it to live. But I find the infrastructure of water and how water gets to us incredibly fascinating, because anytime we're turning on the taps at our homes and pouring a glass of water or opening a bottle of water or whatever, a whole host of things had to happen for that moment to happen that we are not thinking about when we're drinking the water, right? Water doesn't just come to our taps in our house. I know you have to pay for it, but it doesn't just come to the tap, right? There's a whole system behind the scenes, pipes, filtration, in some places desalination, engineering, carting things from point A to point B, the design of the taps, taps weren't just given to us, someone had to create those. There's a whole system that has to happen, right? But we don't realize that it's happening when we're drinking water, because clean water is only important when we don't have it. And I think the exact same thing happens in most of our brains when we're at a gig experiencing our favorite artist, or where we're listening to a song on whatever streaming service you choose to use, or you're in your car. And whether it's an active listen or a passive listen, so passive music listening is when just music is around you, right? Active music listening is when you seek out whatever it is that you're listening to. Regardless of whether you're paying attention to it or not, because most of the music that we listen to, we're actually not paying attention. It's just kind of happening around us. You're probably not thinking about, okay, where was it recorded? Who recorded it? How was it recorded? Who were the people that, were participating in that system? How were they educated? Okay, they had to have instruments. Where were they made? How were they made? How did they get there? How did the studio get built, right? When you're at a gig, whether it's a festival or a small gig in a venue, I can count at least 20 to 30 jobs that are happening behind the scenes that are facilitated by that artist on stage that I never pay attention to when I'm at a gig, right? You're probably not thinking about, oh, that's a great, bartender. We should, and we need to tip them. Or thinking about, if it's a bigger gig, the caterer backstage or the rigger or the person driving the tour bus or the lorry or the accountant of the band, which is arguably the most important job, or the designer who designed the poster, the security guard. None of these jobs would happen without that artist on stage or without that music that makes it to you. Yet, when it comes to music, it is like water. We treat it, and I call it the ignorance of ubiquity, because music is all around us all the time, right? And it is. we kind of forget that it isn't a natural resource. We kind of forget that clean water isn't something that is always going to be delivered to us if we don't pay attention to it and we don't invest in the infrastructure that gets it to us. Music is exactly the same way, right? Music is this thing that we all share. I would argue that it's one of the only things that we all do not need to live, but we would all probably struggle to live without. Life would go on without music, but would it? Literally it would. You know, it would suck, but it would go on. Yet, how music gets to us, the real nuts and bolts of how music gets to us, from point A to point B, right? How it's recorded, how it gets on the internet, how it gets to whatever streaming service, how concerts happen, how venues get built, where they get built and why. All the systems that govern the creation of a live music venue, a recording studio, or a music education institution. All of these things are happening behind the scenes, but we tend not to pay attention to them. And this leads to a disconnect between the value of music that we all have personally, but then the value of music that we take collectively in the places in which we live. I've spent my entire life working in the music industry, my entire life, since I was 15. Not out of choice. I'm not one of those people that woke up and said, I really want to work in the music industry. God, no. After nearly 30 years. No, not 30 years yet. I'm not that old. Less than 30 years. I lie. When I was 15, I worked for 3 weeks at McDonald's and got fired. I was a bit of a difficult employee. I didn't like my boss, so I threw his watch in the fryer and he fired me. That's what I did. And I do kind of regret it. It was not the right thing to do at the time. But I was just a bit of I wasn't very good at school. I was going through some family issues where I was responding to them in the wrong way. I was 15 years old and I was taking drugs and I was drinking and I wasn't going to school. I got expelled from my junior high and then I just got allowed back into high school. But the thing that kind of kept me going and kept me emotionally invested in life was music. I was always completely obsessed with music of all genres and all disciplines. There are some genres I do not understand, but they fascinate me because I do not understand them. Like opera. I don't understand opera. I appreciate it, but I don't understand it. It's just a personal thing, but I know how brilliant it is. So there was always this through line in my life where music was kind of the thing that kept me out of trouble. And when I was 15, I ended up getting a job at my local music venue in Toronto, illegally. I used a fake ID. Not a good kid at the time. I'm slightly better now, I promise. But I used a fake ID to get a job collecting glasses and sweeping floors, right? I snuck out of my house. My mom didn't know. She knows now. I took the bus down. I worked from 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. I took the night bus back, which we lovingly call the Vomit Comet. That's what it was called, the 97 bus. In Toronto, in Canada. And that's what I did for about 4 months. I worked the days that the bands that were playing that I wanted to see were playing, right? So, I couldn't afford to go see them. I felt that at some point they would realize that I was really young. It was not a venue that really cared, to be honest, at the time. And a few months into the job, the booking agent who booked the bands, he got sick. And the owner, and he had to take some time off. And the owner noticed that I was constantly paying attention to the music and I was really into it. Also, I don't think I was very good at my job. And so he turned to me and he said, well, you like the music, why don't you book the bands? When I was 16 years old, I was booking a 400 capacity music venue in Toronto. And that was my first job in the music industry. At the same time, I got a job in a record store, working weekends, and that was it. And since then, I've done pretty much every job in this business, none very well. That's probably why I've moved from different jobs. I've worked at a record label, I've run festivals, I've run venues, I've worked at a music publisher, I've even worked for a government agency. That's how I met Mark. I've done all of these things before setting up the company that I run now and writing the book. And the more that I did this work across different sides of the music industry, and the more that I kept having to convince people that I had a quote-unquote real job, I did. And again, I come from like a Canadian conservative Jewish family where I'm expected to be a lawyer, a doctor, or an accountant, or a management consultant. All my siblings are those things, by the way. I am not. So, but I realized over the years that kind of my obsession with music was kind of bumping up against people's lack of understanding of music, right? And the more jobs that I did in the industry, the more I realized how little people know about how music works at its most basic level. Literally, how people get paid, how music gets on the internet, very basic stuff. And as I kept working, I started to engage more with governments, and I ended up through a series of happy accidents and bothering the heck out of people, to be honest, which is a bit of a through line of my life. I ended up getting a job as a consultant working for the Mayor of London, doing music policy. And the reason I got that job, this was back in 2015, was a venue that I deeply cared about in London. I had already moved to the UK. I had gone to school and stuff. A venue that I deeply cared about in London had closed down. It was called the Luminaire, and now it's the Luminaire Apartments. And it really pissed me off. And the reason why, it was the venue that I convinced my then girlfriend, now wife, to get back together with me after she broke up with me for a few months while we were dating at the beginning of our relationship. It was music and alcohol that helped. And the Mayor of London at the time, Boris Johnson, yep, that was the Mayor of London at the time. He had, to his credit, this is probably the only time I'd ever say that, he set up, working with a bunch of people in the industry, he set up a task force because the Luminaire wasn't the only venue that closed. It turns out that a third of London's music venues, about 80 venues, had closed in 10 years for a variety of reasons. Obviously, this is before COVID. So we set up a task force to try to understand the problem. And this was actually pretty progressive and forward-thinking at the time. The Mayor of London has has a culture department. The culture department is still run by the same people now that were running it then. And I volunteered to be on that task force, and they ignored me because who was I? I was just some guy working in the music industry. So I just started to bother the heck out of them. And the way that they finally let me in was I pretended to be an expert by creating a conference about music policy and then inviting them to speak. So that's what we did. So there's a festival in the UK called The Great Escape, which is like the I don't know what the New Zealand equivalent would be, but it's like a showcase. It's in Brighton in the south of London, and it's a festival that doesn't happen in a field. It happens in all the venues in town, right? City festival. It's the biggest one. About 40,000 people go. It's now owned by Live Nation. It's a big festival. At the time, it was run independently, and I knew the owner of the festival quite well. He's a dear friend of mine. And I asked him if I could take the day before and use his infrastructure and do a day conference about why music venues were closing. I remember we did it at a movie theater because we had to finish by 6 because they were showing the Avengers at 6:30. And I invited the Mayor of London's music person and culture person down to speak. They came. I even bought their train ticket. We did all sorts of sneaky things. We sold 8 tickets in a room of 100 people Then we gave the rest of the tickets away and then called it sold out and made a big stink about it. Lost a lot of money at the time. And I wrote about this in the book. There's a chapter about this in the book. So long story short, he came down, had a great time, called me 2 weeks later and asked me to be on the task force. That started a 3.5-year relationship where I was a consultant in the mayor's office. I was never a staff, working on this kind of stuff. And I worked on all sorts of stuff, made lots of mistakes. And I realized that the biggest challenge that we have in music in our communities, regardless whether it's about live music and trying to make live music thrive in whatever definition of live music you each have, because some people think it's a small, divey bar music venue. Some people think it's a concert hall. Some people think it's a stadium. It's all of those things, obviously. Or how to support and sustain music education, or how to, develop policies to attract creatives, whatever that means. Lots of cities are trying to keep people here rather than people emigrating out, especially small to mid-sized cities that are far away from places. I found that. And we don't want people leaving because it's very, very hard to get them to come back. If there is a lack of understanding of how the music economy or the wider creative economy is an economy, i.e., how does it create jobs? How does it sustain jobs? How much is it worth economically and socially? Where is it? Who's involved? Are there people who are not involved that should be because of class issues, racial issues, economic issues that exists in every community, unfortunately. What we realized in my time working in London, and then subsequently lots of other cities started to call, and I've since worked in about 130 cities around the world doing this kind of stuff, is the most important thing was, A, to never assume, because people tend not to know, and not knowing is not bad. Not knowing is just not knowing. And 2 is that we need to act and think of ourselves more as translators. Because there is a lack of understanding of how music works. And if there's a lack of understanding of how music works, then how can you create policy to make it work and to support it? Especially when in most communities, I'm guessing here too, there is no music policy. And if a city does not have a music policy, and a music policy is different things in different places, but every city has music, and when a city doesn't have a music policy, which usually is a data and evidence base to understand music in your community. Again, where is it? What is it? How much is it worth? How does it all fit together? What are the challenges? Where are the challenges? How much do they cost to fix? All these kind of questions. If you don't have that, then music will be governed by other policies, right? And that's the biggest challenge that we face, because it's usually governed by alcohol and liquor, sound and noise, housing, regeneration, or whatever, I don't know if that's the word in New Zealand, but redevelopment, regeneration, tourism. And no matter what, the decisions that are taken on how to best support music will then be taken from the lens of those things. It's not about being good or bad. It's just a lack of translation. And I realize this, that everybody kind of has the same unique problems doing this. We always joke about that. Doing this all over the world. And the fundamental misunderstanding was that no one was acting as a translator. If we don't understand the value of music in our community collectively, then all we understand is the value of music individually. And again, when I say the word music, that means something different to each and every one of you in this room. And when decisions around music are made through an individual lens, then they support individuals. They do not support the collective. And in a city like Christchurch, as in any city in the world, every genre exists. Every discipline exists. There's more theremin players here than you probably think, I promise. There's a lot of theremin players I've discovered in lots of places. And if you don't know what that is, then don't Google the theremin. or buy a theremin. They're surprisingly expensive. And and I realized that complaining is not getting me anywhere. Saying that music is threatened, or this coming from a language of negativity, or coming from a language of victimization, which music tends to be very good at. We tend to think of ourselves as being affronted in one way or another, or threatened by one thing or another. Yet we, the music ecosystem, whether you're making it or you're listening to it, you're part of something that is intrinsically part of all of us, and something that I would argue we would all struggle to live without. So after all this time with London and lots of other cities, and I've written about a few of them in the book, I have a whole chapter dedicated to a city in the United States in the South, in Alabama, that I worked in, where we've had a lot of success. But at the start of the project, I got death threats because the newspaper published how much money we were being paid as consultants, which was about the same as everyone else. But still, it was, a reasonable amount of money. And I got a lot of death threats. Why are these people coming here? And then after the study, after all our work was published and some results came out of it, one of the people who sent me a death threat gave me a big hug, which I really appreciated. Came up to me when I was last, and we're friends now. I think it was an emotional thing. People sometimes have these emotional moments where they may say things that they don't mean online. But what I realized with London and with all of these cities is the one thing that we do not tend to have in our communities as a music ecosystem or a creative ecosystem, not just music, is a seat at the table, right? All a city is a collection of decisions that people make to prioritize certain things and deprioritize other things, right? And I can see in a city like Christchurch, there's a lot of decisions have been made over the last 10 to 15 years. And I'm just, as an outsider, I'm incredibly impressed at how beautiful the city is now compared to, I guess, what you had to deal with over the last little while. But that's what a city is, right? You elect people to make decisions. Those people can make decisions for the collective, or they can make decisions individually. But that's what it is. And unless music has a seat at the table in terms of where those decisions are being made, and we can then start to communicate the value of music in relation to all those other things I said, economic development, tourism, racial justice and equity, gender equality, climate change, all these big things that cities are making decisions about as to how to deal with, housing, all this kind of stuff, then we will be deprioritized because we don't have a seat at the table. And then looking back at all the mistakes that I had made, I made a lot. I thought to myself, as and I had a little bit of time during COVID, because I furloughed myself in the UK, that means you're not even allowed to check email, but the government pays you a basic salary. So I had time to write the book. I just thought, well, what if I could start from scratch? What would I say to Mayor Sadiq Khan in London? Or, I'm sorry, I don't know the name of your mayor, but Mayor... It's not worth knowing. Okay, I'm sorry. I should do my research better. But no. Or city council member, or head of economic development, or a property developer, or head of your tourism board, whatever, right? What would I say to say, okay, well, how can music be a solution to your problems? How can music make your job better? How can music make your life better? And some people are very transactional, some people are not, right? And that's what the book is. The book is everything that I had learned as to what I thought worked and what I thought didn't work, and what music means to me. And what music means to me is, I believe, the ability to move away from being ignorant about its ubiquity and instead being protective about its ubiquity. And the more we think about how we can embed music into our communities, the more we find ways to save money, the more we find ways to attract and retain people of all cultures and all, whether it's through people that are born here or people that come here, the more we can find ways to talk to each other. I've found so many solutions for music with the pure self-interest that every single one of those solutions means that musicians are being paid, means that the music economy is growing and the music ecosystem is being embedded and protected more in communities. But we have to think about it that way. We have not to think about a music solution to a music problem where music is a hammer and everything is a nail. I think that we need to think of music as a nail and everything else as a hammer, and start to ask questions like, how can we make Christchurch healthier? Right? Music probably has a part to play in that. How can we fight poverty? I believe music has a part to play in that. How can we increase tourism? How can we continue to grow this city in an equitable way so that people can go out and have fun and people can go to sleep at the same time? I promise technology exists to allow that to happen, right? How can we do all of these things so that the city is reflective of the people that live there, but also that music has a seat at the table? So the book has been an incredible surprise to me. This is a niche book about music, I get that, but the response that I've had around the world has been overwhelming. It's in its third reprint. It's being translated into 6 languages this year. An audiobook is coming out finally, because I've had a lot of people tell me I can't wait to listen to your book. My brother is one of those people. But I feel that this just, the reason why I guess I'm sitting here talking to you in a city that is literally a world away from where I am from and where I live just shows how valuable and how important music is to each one of us. So my hope is that with the book you see it in a slightly different way, and you see not only how powerful music is and it reaffirms your individual love of music, but also that you can see how it is right now one of the most powerful tools that we have to address the problems that we're facing in the world and to make places better. Because one thing I learned during COVID is COVID was the worst possible case study about why music matters, right? I'm sad that it took COVID, but imagine COVID without music, getting through it, right? Especially you guys. You guys went through a lot. New Zealand, I learned, with your lockdown compared to other countries. Yet, music has not been elevated since COVID in terms of how we think about it in what matters to us in our cities and places. Well, why is that? And I think we have a great opportunity right now and over the next few years to really centralize music and wider arts and culture in terms of ensuring that it is part of the big decisions that we take in our communities and that we have a seat at the table, because that's what we need. So thank you so much for having me here.